This is your captain speaking.
Welcome back to This Is Your Captain Speaking, New Zealand's only podcast where we're giving you access to New Zealand's top technology executives and their stories. This week, we're catching up with Audrey Cheng, who runs one of the top technology product consultancies in New Zealand. How did she get in that position? Well, she's headed up product for Pushpay, for Snapcomms, and Imager, and most recently, ComplyPro. She's going to tell us all about the mechanics of product management, what works, what doesn't, and what great leadership looks like in this space. And in addition, staring down the barrel of what's coming on the horizon, what are we going to do about the influx of AI tooling into product and how it's going to make us more effective? Hi, I'm Julian Lambert.
Hi, Julian.
I'm one of the directors at Potentia, and I head up the leadership search for the business. We're the largest technology recruitment company in New Zealand.
Wow, that's amazing.
Thanks.
I'm Audrey.
All right.
Cheng. And I'm actually a product leader. And currently I'm running an advisory and coaching, coaching consultancy that just help working with CEOs and founders of tech businesses, really helping them connect their objectives to the actual technical roadmaps and then trying to drive sales.
That's cool. How did you get into that?
Well, I've been working for a number of New Zealand tech businesses in, the head product role, like as a chief product officer. And so really driving and running teams for about 15 plus years now, and in technology for longer than that. So
Right.
Yeah.
Do I know any of those tech companies that you've worked for?
I'm most known for the work that I did at Pushpay, but I've gone on to Snapcomms, which was acquired by a U.S. business, worked for Imager, which was a deep tech computer vision company, and then more recently with ComplyPro, which was a compliance product for health and safety as well as food safety.
Wow. Okay. So
a lot of fun.
Yeah. And these companies have kind of expanded overseas and done their thing, new jurisdictions, that sort of thing?
For sure. And they're all at various different stages of growth. Like with Pushpay, I was there from very early stage. It was actually a hyper-growth company. So we grew quite rapidly, and I was there for about 6 years where we expanded into the U.S. predominantly, and had amazing growth. So I was there, I think, from about maybe 1 million in revenue to about 187 was the last annual report, I think.
Just around about 187. Not counting.
So I was a VP of product there and grew the product design and user research practice there.
Nice one. Yeah. Nice one. So, product leadership has been, I think I've always had this kind of rule of thumb that we're around about sort of 5 years behind where the US is at any one time. What do you think about the product leadership maturity in the country at the moment? I mean, it's hard yakka, right, at the moment, because you've got a lack of funding for these early stage businesses as they want to ramp. There's perhaps a lack of funding to enter into new jurisdictions. So what do you think about the state of the kind of the product leadership in the community?
I think for me, when I look across product management, I think there has been, maybe over the years that I've been in product management, a lot of focus on more like the tactical execution, working with engineering and building that relationship, because it wasn't strong in those very early days when I started there. Then now there's more emerging around, thinking about the commercialization of products. And what I'm often seeing now within more established businesses is that they're getting someone from the business to actually emerge as the product leader.
Like a subject matter expert and then turning them into a product manager?
Exactly, yes. And that's because they have a lot of contextual knowledge about the business. They don't have to teach them about the business. But then what they're missing is, how do I translate these business needs into something that can be executed in a roadmap? How do I communicate that? So a lot of the work that I'm doing is really about teaching product leaders, founders, and CEOs really how to tell a product story, right? And that's really about what's your purpose? Like what's your reason for being? What's the problem that you're solving, and who you're solving that for? Why does it matter? And that connected to then the items that may form part of your roadmap then makes sense, right? You can tell a story around it, and it really helps with your launch and go-to-market process. And so I'm seeing a lot of change in terms of like who's actually becoming a product leader. Are people bringing people from outside? Sometimes that expertise is needed, and you can train the context. So it really depends on which angle organizations are wanting to run from.
It sounds like it sounds like if you've got a subject matter expert, they've got a lot of that context that you talked about before, but they lack those kind of professional practices or maybe the skills to be able to translate that into something that's the best chance of creating either product market fit or expansion or all those sort of things. Do you think that's pretty commonplace amongst product
I think
companies?
it's actually, as I'm working with more and more businesses now, I'm actually finding it more and more common that is the case, that the product leader, maybe they have been established in the role for some time, but they did come from the business and haven't had that grounding. And so, working on their own context is really helpful in terms of helping them to transform. How do I think about, like, what are the goals of the business? Sometimes I ask and they don't know. They're just really focused on what's in the roadmap and why aren't people aligned. And I'm getting a lot of kickback in our steering groups and things like that. So that's where the kind of the problem manifests itself. But where I think the challenges really are is, like, do we have a clear understanding of where the business is driving to, and do we have a clear understanding of how to translate that into the work that we're actually driving through our teams? And if you can imagine, these leaders are also leading people. So, how are you leading if you're not exactly sure the direction that you should go in, or that you're picking pieces? How do they cohesively fit together?
Yeah. How did you kind of start in your product journey into leadership yourself? Like, were you kind of born or forged or made? Like what drew you into this?
Baptism by fire, maybe. I think you work in a role, like quite often in an early stage company, you're working in a role and kind of doing a whole bunch of things. And then there is a need for that role. And that's what happened to me, is I didn't even know there was a role like this in technology. Right. I was working, I think, doing support for a tech company that kind of had a product on the side, and then they needed a product manager. And so I kind of said, okay, I'll do it, but I had no idea really what I was doing in those early stages. And organizations like mine, the product didn't exist in those stages. And product management actually used to sit really in marketing. And where the issue lied was that connection again, but back to, like, what are we building and how we're aligning and things like that. So then the role seemed to have moved more into the technology space, but then lost a lot of the commercial nous that marketing brings. And so I think that's where some of the gap still lies today when we think about how product management shifted. So if you look at, like, commercial goods, you still see product management still in the marketing space. But when you look at, like, our technology products, you see them sitting in delivery. Yeah. And that's because there is this marriage that needs to happen between commercial and technology.
So you kind of stumbled into this space and you kind of figured it out along the way. And then what happened after that? Did you kind of go, okay, well, I'd like this product management thing. Actually, there's a lot of value that can be added here. And did you step up into that leadership? Or what kind of happened?
I think it's a very creative role, like being in product and building product. And I think that's an exciting part of it. And I think as a product manager, just as the manager, at that time it was just me and the engineer. But then I ended up managing the engineer because he was a contractor. Right. And so I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't have anything to teach him really. But what I can do is get things out of the way, right? And so that was probably my first foray into real management. And then we started to grow and build a team, and him and I started getting successful, and we're like, okay, let's hire some people to help him out. And so we started to build in that way. And so it was never about, telling engineers how to build what they need to build, but to collaborate. And so,
Do you think that, like, that when you step into that leadership, what were the kind of the really hard lessons that you had to bump up against along the way?
I guess things are...
Like, you got this product space that it's emerging, right? And then you're having to step into a leadership role emerging as well.
Yes. I think, like, it's moving away from, like, you doing everything, right? So being that individual contributor into now, like, actually I have to be more organized to actually have a cohesive plan that people can buy into, that they can execute on. And I think that is a big change stepping into leadership, that you kind of recognize that, like, oh, actually, it's not just me and I'm kind of being led by what I know. I actually have to create plans. I have to bring people on the journey. I have to make sure that they feel that they're well equipped to execute as well. So it's all this thinking about, like, how do I create a great team? How do I create great plans? Or how do I create a vision that people actually want to follow in the first place, And then it's really about, like, can I drive towards the outcomes for the business? Because I think that's a side that, like, when you're an individual contributor, your manager's giving you the task or the, giving you space to deliver on something, but they're giving it to you and they're saying that this is important. Yep. When you're leading, you're almost saying this is what's important, right? And that might obviously has some influence depending on what level of management you're at, but you are then responsible for the outcomes of that team, not just for yourself, right? And so it's having that clarity. And I think that can be a challenge of letting go and, like, the loss of control, right? Like, because it's control in a different way, right? But you can't force anybody to execute anything, really.
Your locus of control just gets wider but less influential, right? And
That's
so
right.
it's like I can control my own output. That's no problem.
Yes.
But I can't control other people's output. But I can definitely orchestrate and influence.
Yes.
And so you talked about getting shit out of the way before. Like, was that kind of, because it sounds like you'd already learned that lesson, but it was that whole like, okay, I've got to understand what is in there, all of these people's way, to be able to get it out of the way. And that's where the systems come in, right?
That's right. And like creating an operating model for your organization. And I think in early stage companies, like you may want to put in place these things to have everything organized, but I don't think that's really practical. And I think it's about looking at what's not working, right? So when you start to see symptoms of like, we seem to like, we're not executing to the way I had expected, or, we're getting lots of interruptions, like trying to identify like what's going on and going like, okay, how should we deal with these things, right? And unpacking them as they appear or as you can start to see them coming on the horizon if you can. That is a good way, because I think often you can layer in too much process and that really slows things down. So it's just this pragmatic balance of thinking about what's coming at us, what's going to stop us from being successful, and trying to make sure you get those things out of the way and putting plans in place or processes in place that help to support the team with that.
That must have been absolutely front and center as it started to ramp and it started to speed up at Pushpay, right? Like no one had really seen that kind of level of hypergrowth, and wanting to continue the velocity, wanting to continue that generation of value, whilst not slowing down with too much process.
Yes.
But, that must have been super confusing.
It was extremely, I'm going to say it's extremely hard, like probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. And I think probably one of the time where I learned a lot about myself, right? Because you're a pattern of success sometimes, like when you have so much to execute on, so much to do, is to just work a little bit harder, just put your foot on the gas for this period, and then it's going to level out and you're going to be fine, you regroup, and then you go off again. But it was never that way. It was always, it was just up, and I think there was a time where there's this balance of people are waiting for you to execute your work so that they can do their work. So you're a dependency, you're the blocker for everybody's work. But then on the other side, you're like, I can't handle all the work, I need to hire. And there's this balance of do I fix process or do I keep executing, right? And so it's trying to decide which fires you're going to jump on. And I think at some point you have to say these fires are going to burn. I have to think about scale, how we're going to execute, and make those that seemingly tough decisions at the time.
Yeah. One of the things that I saw a clip of Johnny Ive, who was obviously the chief designer at Apple, and he said the crazy thing about Steve Jobs was that Steve taught me that you could have the best idea, you can have the most amazing product in mind that will be successful, but you can't distract yourself from what you're focused on at the moment to execute, because if you do anything as related to this product that is brilliant, then it takes you away from the primary goal of doing these things, which I guess there's a parallel there, right? Because you're like, actually, these fires that are burning, they're really important, but they're not the burning platform. They're not ultimately going to make us fail. So we have to focus on the things the critical path.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And I think I don't know, that was just making me think of other things where quite often there are a lot of ideas within an organization, and yes, they're great ideas, but are they right now ideas? And making those trade-offs, I think as a lead, particularly as a product leader, you have to be thinking about is this a right now thing? We put off things that people were hounding me for years, mainly because there was a workaround for them. And we were scaling so fast. We're trying to acquire market. So we're trying to build the things that we couldn't solve in any way, and that was really hard for some people who were asking for these features, but it's always making, that the choice and compromise. You can't do it all, right? And so which ones are the most important ones? And you don't always get it right.
What was the blend between kind of data and intuition in those instances? How data focused were you, and how much did you rely upon your intuition and dealing with the pace? You knew what you needed to focus on.
Yeah, it's a balance of both. And I think particularly at that time at Pushpay, we slowly grew in our data maturity, right? And so in the early days, we perhaps didn't have as much as we'd want. So we did run a lot on intuition, what the feedback we got from the market. And then we started to really understand the usage on our platform and really start to put in place tools. And that's why having a good relationship with your engineering team is so important. One of the most important relationships was my relationship with the VP of engineering there, or CTOs in other organizations I've gone to. Because if that's not working well and that partnership isn't lockstep, then your product is not going to be successful because your execution layer and your strategy layer and your go-to-market, they're not in sync with each other. Or, it's unpredictable what's coming out of engineering, or they're not aligned to perhaps what the requirements are if you haven't been clear about the scope. But if that is lockstep and you're there together and you're dissecting challenges that came up, like we didn't get it right, why didn't we get it right? Okay, let's do this next time. Having that ability to have that trust and that partnership becomes really important. If you have that really well established, then I would say working with your sales team, sales leaders, and that partnership becomes really important as a leader. So instead of thinking like, hey, yes, my team who's executing underneath me, who actually work or directly report to me, are really important, and I'm going to support them. But my job is really to build relationships across the organization in a cross-functional way, so that we can, as a business, leverage all the work that we're doing and make momentum together.
Yeah.
And so that idea of making sure that yes, I'm having conversations with sales. Yes, we have a good understanding. We're trying to build a strong relationship. Maybe not quite in the same way that I've had with with engineering or with my CTO, but I feel like having that established relationship of how do we make sure that you can get deals? How do I help deliver things that actually get us sales too? Like I want them too. So let's not just ask for things that you just heard in the last conversation. Let's look at your data. And so that's where things can be helpful, is like when requests come in, is like, well, who's requesting? How many? What do those deals look like? And having a good understanding
of that. It's so commercial though, right? I just don't think a lot of product people live there. And like I'm familiar with the VP of engineering at Pushpay. I know him, and he has reasonably high expectations of himself and those around him. But that, you talked about that relationship. I think that some people think about a relationship being like happy clappy. There's a degree of compromise in that relationship. But I'm putting some words in your mouth here, but that there is tension in that relationship,
yes.
right? Like big tension, because they want to build things right, and you want to build the right thing, and that you're going to bump up against each other, right? Like that relationship needs to be strong enough and needs to be respect, but it's not always a happy clappy relationship.
No,
right?
but I think the healthiest relations are when you can challenge respectfully. And I think that's really important, is that we can have a really tough conversation about the thing that we're looking forward to, or maybe a challenging around the priorities, or maybe challenging how we might solve it. However, I'm not going to attack you personally, right? And so what I always feel is like, if we can walk out and have lunch at the end of it, grab a beer, whatever, like that's a healthy relationship when we've just had like a really tough conversation and just say like, okay, let's put a pin in it for now. Let's come back to it and try and get some more alignment, but let's go grab lunch.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's healthy. But if you walked away and were like, oh, Audrey was so rude to me in that conversation, belittling my ideas, like that is not a healthy relationship, right? And so debate is necessary to get a good outcome and to get the best outcome for your customers and for the business. Because if we don't say what's on our mind, we don't raise our concerns or risks and then align on a decision, then how are we getting those best outcomes? Because you've kind of or I have kind of said, I'd rather be comfortable than to raise something that actually could make this product better.
I mean, that's also a rule of life, right?
Yes.
I think it's interesting though, because you talk about that, and again, you've got to respect that person's capability. And so when you're entering into those organizations, into that leadership style role, I mean, you must be digging to figure out whether this is the right CTO to work with, this is the right VP. It's not going to be the same as Pushpay, but it needs. I know what I'm looking for. Is that
for sure? And I think I think you're looking for someone who is open to working with you, for one, and respects your craft too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's easy to respect engineering. I think it's a little bit harder in some ways to have that reciprocated in all ways, right? And so I think someone who respects what you can do, the change what you can do to make life better for engineering, right? And I think when that relationship healthy, engineering is healthy, right? And so I think you do look for can I work with this leadership team? Who are the players? Is this person going to want to partner with me openly in a trusted relationship? We don't need to be best friends. Some of my old CTOs are my really good friends now, but it doesn't need to be the case, right? It just means can we respect each other at work? Can we have an open conversation? And will this person respect my opinion enough to consider it?
I think from what I've seen in product development organizations as well, there sometimes isn't a level of commitment to product being in an equitable leadership capability. Is that fair to say from historics? Because what I get is, yes, you need to be able to figure out whether you can work with these people and whether they understand your craft, respect your craft. But there also needs to be a commitment from the shareholders group or the directors that product has an equitable role, right, in the development of these products. Because if it sits in delivery and there's very little kind of commercial acumen, then it's kind of seen as we're engineering led.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you hit the nail on the head that like when product management is thought of as it will help us deliver faster and in those specific terms, then the thought is it should sit in engineering, right? But I think it is great when you can have the two roles in partnership, because then they have equitable say in how the direction of the product and can partner in that way. Now, it doesn't necessarily always need to be that case. I would advocate for more of a structure that way. But sometimes it is the case that one will fall under the other. But as long as there is openness and respect in the sense of that they respect what that person is bringing to the table or what each other are bringing to the table, then I think it can work too. But I think often when it is set, when it's thought of that product management is delivery focused, so you might see a lot of like product ownership, which is actually, if you look at what the role actually is, it's actually a delivery focused role, right? It's about helping engineers be organized in their sprints and their scrum, So when you're at that, when you've defined it that way, then it's natural it falls in that category. But when you're thinking about actually striving direction, striving strategy, is really getting deep into understanding your customer, then it kind of sits in a different layer to where than in that delivery space, right? Like delivery is part of could be part of the product management role, often is.
It's kind of part of everyone's role, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a shared, and it needs to, and in my opinion, I think when there's shared ownership around delivery, then product managers are not committing engineers to things that are not achievable. I will never give an estimate unless I've talked to the CTO about how big do we think we are, and then I always create some wiggle room for us to be able to move when we know things always happen during development. It's never cut and dry that is exactly 3 months and this date and no thing, right? So there is that level of, when you can get to a level of partnership, then you can establish like operating models like that where we can say like, hey, I need a t-shirt sizing from you. I'm not going to commit you to a date, but I just need to know like how much time we need to plan for when we think about like when the team's going to execute on this. I'll work out something sane for launch. And of course, we'll always have that conversation if stuff comes up and we know there's going to be delays, but we are clear on why, right?
So, do you think that is there a checklist? Because you've talked, a lot of that stuff's about the fertile ground and the respect for product. A lot of that's about being clear on what the delivery needs to look like. Do you think that there's like a checklist that any product leader should be coming in and thinking about when they come into these organizations, either if they're talking to the founders or they're talking to whoever, even in enterprises, when you've got that kind of, what do they need to look for to figure out whether products actually got the mana that is required for it to be effective, and that the relationships are going to be in a state of, like we talked about, equal opportunity.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of like compatibility, right, with the team, and I think mostly I'm looking for that with the CEO and the CTO in a lot of ways. It's like, what does our compatibility look like? And a lot of, for me, is like, are they open to new ideas? Can I engage them in a conversation of something that they didn't know before? Do they know already? And so it's like, and if they don't know already, are they interested in it?
Yes.
And so it's these ideas of like, can you have a conversation with them where you're pushing maybe some new ideas, and how do they receive that, right? And so I think there's a little bit of like checking that I would feel like, in terms of, not every organization is right for you, right? And it's just finding like, is the culture, the way the leadership team operates, the way that people receive new people, new ideas, how is that best received? And is that fit with your own values and the way that you like to work?
It's so interesting, because I think that there's also this point where, I've worked with organizations, product development organizations, very early, and bringing in too much product horsepower, where actually they just needed to ship some code. They needed to get some experiments done. And there was probably too much process system added from that product leadership. And then you get other organizations which, it's almost like emperor's new clothes. they're just building product and they're getting validation from the engineering and the founder or the CEO, and they're going, yeah, this is all great, and then they get to a point where they don't achieve product market fit because actually no one's had their eye on the data and on the customers and on the competitors, etc. Right? It seems that it's it's that Goldilocks zone of product capability. So do you have an idea about where they need to be able to achieve product market fit, and what kind of timing?
Yeah, I think someone needs to be driving product. In an early stage company, it's typically one of the founders, right? And in that case, typically they wouldn't need someone like me, for example, to come on board as a full-time or part-time, maybe as an advisor, but mostly there is someone already with a vision, is already driving, is already thinking about the market, already looking at the competitors. It's usually a founder in an early stage company. When that founder is either like now going to be focusing on as a CEO, for example, or engineering is getting too big, they're the CTO and they're moving into that space, that's often a time to get help, right? And that might not necessarily mean a chief product officer. It might mean getting a good product manager in to just come and help, still have that steering group of the co-founders there to help support. So there is this way of thinking like who is actually running it, who's making the decisions, who's doing the discovery work, right? And kind of moving from there, and then sometimes when there's none, I think it's great to go like, well, actually, how do we know what we're doing? And just taking a pause, right? And saying like, actually, how do we know we're working on the right things? How do we know, like things are pumping out, but how much validation are we getting from the market? So there is this balance of thinking about like, who's actually doing that within our organization? Someone has to hold the responsibility. They don't necessarily need the title, right?
Nice. When you talk about that all the stuff that you're talking about with Pushpay, I mean, that was, what was that, 12 years ago? And, all of the stuff that you're looking at, competitive analysis and data and all those sort of things, that all sounds like table stakes now, but that was pretty early, right? Like looking at all those sort of things. And so, coming back to that product maturity piece, I think that there's a bunch of organizations now that kind of get the right tools in place and have a few more processes and systems. But as far as New Zealand goes for product marketing, go-to-market, all of those aspects which are now starting to build, leading question, but I feel that a lot of product development organizations really don't understand that there's a whole bunch of tools and systems out there that are going to assist you to be able to, once you've got your product launched, what are you going to do with it, right? And so does this kind of fall into your remit as well? Do you think that falls under the big product umbrella? Because New Zealand's not particularly good at these pieces, right?
Yeah, well, I think what you're talking about comes into like the measurement aspect, I think, of how your product is performing, which I think every product manager should have their eye on. Because how do you know you're actually successful? Like, otherwise we're just delivery, right?
How do they do that? Like, what do they need to invest in some stuff? Like, what how does it work?
Well, I think you need to think up front when you're building something is like, actually, what's the measure of success, right? What we're trying to get here. Like, so when I think about prioritizing things, I think about like, well, what are the revenue levers? How does this product actually make money, right? Or what's our objective with this one? Is it retention? Is it to drive down support tickets? Is it to get new revenue? Is it a new product? Is it an add-on? Is it an upsell feature? Like, so it's really to think about like, actually, what are you trying to drive overall? And then what are the indicators that you're going to get that? So for example, if I'm launching a new, let's call it an add-on maybe, or maybe it's like, we had a lot of closed loss in our pipeline for a specific feature. I'd be probably going to sales and asking them, what was your closed loss list for this look like? How much of that could we close if we were to build it, right? Okay, and then once we built it, I'll be looking for them to go and close those, for example, right? Or like see how successful we were in closing them. Like how close were we to really understanding that this was a closed loss reason, So I think that there are ways of like, I guess different things, right? So if I'm measuring like completion of a journey, I'm going to put measurement in the tool and I'm going to be discussing that with engineering as we go, before we build, right? Because you need to understand what's the baseline and what are you targeting. So you need to really be thinking about these metrics up front and building them into your platform, right? On the other side of it, if it's like support tickets and that, you're tracking that within the system, right? How, like, are we seeing like are we still seeing the same volume of tickets? Are we seeing like time decrease on those types of tickets? For sales, it's like, are we actually getting sales that are attributed to this now. You know, so I guess those are ways of looking at like how can your product be successful.
And you're collecting data because that's innate in the systems that you've set up, or is it?
You have to be intentional. You've got to be intentional, and that's why like in the beginning, before you're even building, having the conversations with the different groups about like, so with engineering, I want to measure these things. I want to measure these points in the journey. I want to measure how many people get to this stage, for example. And, you know, there are tools like, you know, even if you had something like embedded in your platform, like Pendo or something like that, you can like put those measures in yourself. You got to work with engineering to put those in though, right? So to layer those tools into your platform so that you can self-serve a little bit. Some of the stuff they're going to pull in the back end, and if you're lucky enough to have a data team, they might be able to pull and aggregate some data from different systems for you.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, it's just so fascinating when you look at this stuff, right? Because there are ways for you to deploy, to launch products, to look at the activity within that, which I think that if you're not building that stuff into the decision making or the development processes or into the products themselves, then you're kind of missing a trick, right? Because retrofitting all of those things into your processes, into the nature of your conversations, and into the product itself just puts you hugely on the back foot.
Yeah, well, I think you lost collecting, but I'd say like the best time is today, right? You know what I mean? Like that old saying goes is like, you know, the best time was so many, like we're in the beginning, and the best time is now, right?
Now, right,
The best time is now. So.
And when you look at the home, like product marketing, go to market, all of the kind of the contemporary practices and tooling and stuff that's happening in that space, do you feel like the local sector is aware of all of the opportunities there? Or do you feel like that maturity is still pretty low and we still put people on planes to go and have conversations with people in your jurisdictions?
I mean, I don't know if everyone's aware of all the tooling. I mean, I don't think I'm aware of all the tooling, but I think it's more about thinking about the process of going to market with the things that you're building, right? And so whether that's thinking about like having very clear value proposition and having a focused ICP for today, it doesn't mean like you might think like, oh, your product is for this whole segment or whatever. But I mean, what can you win today? And being really clearly focused on that is really important, because it's very tempting when deals come to go like, oh, let's just do this thing, but we just have to do this one thing. You know what I mean? So it's very tempting to not be focused, similar to our earlier conversation about shiny things and, you know, not being able to kind of clearly execute on what you're working on and getting distracted. And I think that like having that clarity is can often be missing about like who exactly are we going after and staying true to it. Right? And it's okay if like we learn something new that makes us change our mind, but it's an intentional decision. It's not like, oh, this new thing came up and now I'm running off to the shiny object over here or distracting my team by building something completely different. And then we realize it wasn't the opportunity that we had expected. Right? So I think that there are things around, I think more important than tooling initially is really just being really intentional about who are we selling to? Like, who is that person? You know, and like how clear can we be on that? How focused can we be on going to market there? What is the messaging and what's our value to them? How do we get crystal clear on the value proposition that we have? Who is that for? So our messaging is clear. It's clear from product and it's really clear from sales, right? Because sometimes there is lost in translation, between the two. Yes, right? Yeah. And so that becomes really important. So I think that whole process of the what and the why coming through really clear through the organization helps to focus development and helps to focus your message in the market. And it grows over time, right? Like the more that we build, the more success we have, the more problems we can solve. We expand who can utilize our product. But initially, it's kind of a staged approach where we kind of figure out who's the best fit.
Though, right? Like
exactly. A product for everyone is a product for no one. Right?
When I look at the kind of the product capability, and do you think that because managing engineering, there's been a lot written about managing engineers and how to get the best out of engineering groups. Do you think that the management practices and people leadership practices within product are markedly different? Because, they're very different. All roads lead to product in a product-led organization. And so, being that product person is can be very confusing and is constantly sitting in compromise. What do you think about what are the go-to things for you when you're leading people within product management?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think the fundamentals of management and leading people are the same. Like people have like intrinsic needs, I think, and I think understanding your audience, I guess the team that's working with you, is really important. I think there are different challenges in the job that maybe make you lead them in a slightly different way. Like product management has always been a variety of jobs. It's like anything that doesn't fall in anybody else's bucket is actually product.
Design,
like every
product
time
marketing.
we're in a meeting and someone's like saying, "Oh, we need this or we need that," I'm thinking, "Oh, I think that's product," and I'm like, "Is it product?"
Yeah.
So, but I think that's challenging, and I think a lot of like the care, I guess, or the stewardship that you provide in a lot of ways is around how to balance time, how to like have some self-care of like saying no to things or letting those things be secondary or letting it be okay for some fires to burn, like we talked about. Like I let some fires burn, communicate them. So it's about thinking about things like, it's okay if you're struggling. Come and talk to me. Let's like figure out a path forward together. Let's look
you're
at
going
your
to struggle, right?
priority.
So,
Yeah, exactly. Like it's going to be hard. Like I'm going to push you to your limit, and then we're going to have a conversation about what we're going to take off you. You know what I mean? Because like often in these organizations, like you are running fast. You don't know where people's limits are, right? And so you kind of give them more until they kind of say like, I don't need any more.
Yeah.
And so then you kind of go, okay, I know the right balancing for them. So I think it is challenging, and every product manager has a sweet spot of like, kind of like that T-shape that people talk about. There is areas that people like to lean in. Some are more technical, some more tools oriented, some are more empathetic and want to be in the research space. But the job is, there's holistic, right?
Yeah.
And so
and commercial. Right?
Yes. And I think like understanding where someone's at and where they're going to need support is really important. That's why I think when you're forming a team is to actually think about the balance of your team, right? Like where do the skill sets lie? How can it not rely on me necessarily to provide that support, but that the team around them has the skills and capability to actually support each other? And one of the things that I really like on my team is to think about in terms of culture is really that even if your product is succeeding, if the person beside you is failing and you haven't reached out to help, that's not success for us, right? We have all failed at that point, right? So it's the idea that we need to be able to help each other and lean across the aisle and leverage our own capabilities and skills to actually help others, right, within our team, because that benefits the whole organization, benefits our team, benefits our outcomes, benefits the overall success of our product.
Yeah, and the product practice is different from the product manager, because product management can be not lonely, but very individual, right? Because you're on a product, right? Unless that product's broken down into a whole bunch of different components and everyone's contributing. But I think it can, because all roads lead to it, because you're constantly having to put on a different hat, put on a different set of spectacles to be able to see the perspective of this particular audience, whether they be sales, marketing, engineering, strategy, operations, deployment, whatever. And so it can be a really difficult role because the context shifting is just massive. And we know that stress comes from context shifting, right? And, it's not discrediting any engineers, but when they've got their headphones on and they're task focused, they're knocking those things out, the juggle or the plate spinning of product management means that the stress is going to go up.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think
the more successful the product becomes, the more stressful. But then as it becomes less successful, it's kind of,
For sure. And I think like if you have a strong product management practice, you'll see that the stress shifts from engineering to product.
Yeah.
Because prior to product management being there to help curate things, to help organize things, engineering is just the one being hit with all sorts of requests, right? Yeah. And they don't know which ones to work on. So it's like, CEO talk to me about this thing. I need to start working on it, right? And we've seen this before in some practices where, engineering is not as well organized, but when product management is successful and in partnership, you see engineering functioning more strongly because they're able to be more focused because they have clarity, right? And then that kind of shifts, right, to the product managers. And I don't know. I mean, it's an exciting role in itself. Like the variety is great. It's not for everybody, I would say. But I think it can be really rewarding, particularly like if you can lean into areas that you particularly enjoy, right? And I really love seeing commercial success. And that's what's exciting for me is when I can see commercial success for my product, like that's a win for everybody, right? And you can see user adoption, you can see user joy, and the result is commercial success.
Yeah. When you look at the sector in itself, locally, the product development sector, the product export sector, it sounds like you've been all over the place with that. And Snapcomss is probably one of those unsung heroes of the product development industry. My understanding is it was bootstrapped the whole way through, didn't get any funding, and then good old Chris Leonard,
Yeah.
and sold it offshore. And but then also Imager, which was just hugely first in the world kind of technology, massively big opportunity within grocery. Sadly, not in existence anymore, I don't think. But like, what do you think? You've seen these very different organizations, bootstrapped, massively funded, flash in the pan. Like, when you look ahead, what does the product development or product export sector need from your perspective?
Oh, well, I mean,
Except better funding.
I actually think like with the rise of AI, and I guess as it's become more popularized now, I guess, like is more accessible to everybody, that I actually think, there's more opportunity for people with ideas to bring them forward and actually to make something of them quicker than what was previously possible. And I think what I'm seeing, I think, is even like service industries thinking about how to better monetize their work, or to think about utilizing these tools to help with operational efficiency, or to get some gains. How do I focus on higher value work, and kind of automate or do something with some of the lower level work that I need to take care of, but I don't necessarily want my people on it, for example. So I see that like the accessibility of new tooling now is going to create an opportunity to have different entrepreneurs coming into the market, I believe. People with ideas that never knew how to make it possible, are potentially now going to experiment with some tooling to try something out and to try and get there, prove it or disprove it fairly quickly. So I think those are the exciting things that are perhaps on the horizon.
The AI thing, do you think that it's going to change product management? I mean, I've got a theory that it's going to, as it might draw product managers to being more technical, because actually now they can generate features themselves. Or do you think it's going to be that the engineers start to kind of bleed into product management? Like, do you have
maybe
any guesses?
all in. No, I think it could be any of those. I think like a lot of the research work that product managers do can be more expedited now. Yeah. Like you can see the rise of like being able to more automatically create like requirements documents. Yeah. Thank goodness, but like all of those things. And then also thinking about like AI products now, products that leveraging AI, and thinking about like, we need to understand, or product managers working on those products now need to really understand how this works, how to test it, how to like what is success, so thinking about like, there's a lot of talk about evals in terms of like, validating your development. And so there's a lot of like interesting changes for product managers as technology is being introduced. But I think on the other side is like, what is it going to replace in terms of the tasks that we used to do, right? I am glad it's actually taking away like the hours of work of building out requirements, and we're also seeing in design, like I think I just saw Figma connected with Claude Code now can, create your front end. Like how exciting is that, right? So, there's like lots of changes that are happening now. And so I do think that the roles are going to be transforming, but I think it still requires thought, right? Like still needs context. It still needs someone to be thinking about the parameters, right? And so I think even though it may take away some of the administrative, some of the research jobs that are being done, I think that there is still a need for humans to actually do the thinking work, right? And to provide the context.
The context is a biggie, and I think that the other part of that is, I'm not going to use too many buzzwords here, but a friend of mine has just recently got some funding, and they're building a new product offshore, and that is about how engineers are able to very quickly generate features now, but because of the way that the code generators are working, it's not necessarily just solving that one functional problem or that particular feature. It might be building something much bigger, and it's very difficult to draw the parameters around those things. And so, they're creating a product development ecosystem where those requirements turn into really very specific PRDs, which are then taken through into the code generation. And so it's just building those pieces, because that new world, it can just spread so fast, right? And you've got maybe not garbage code, but you've got really expansive problems to what was from the product manager. Oh no, I just needed that thing done, not this. I don't need you to build a whole cathedral around that stuff. Are you seeing that stuff happening, or is that not really part of what you're seeing?
Yeah, I think it's very tempting to like build lots of stuff, right? But I think it's like going back to purpose and like curation, and thinking about like, actually, how do I guide this in a path, and how do I curate what's actually what the end result is and what the output is, right? Like it says, is like it can make mistakes. It might not be quite right. It's making some assumptions. Like you still have to put the thinking in, right? And even though like it may look great on the surface, like you really need to look at it and kind of evaluate it for yourself, right? And I think these are the things that become important, because it is very tempting, I think, to like have a lot of proliferation, but for what purpose and for what outcome?
Yeah, there's that famous Mark Twain saying, right? Like I always think about this. I'm like, I would have written a short letter, but I didn't have time, right? And because actually, when you're thinking about the specificity of the product and what it needs to have, it doesn't need to be expensive. It needs to solve the problem, right? Rather than having all of the color around it.
Yeah, and I think it's right.
And when you think about what's coming down the barrel, is there anything on the horizon that's kind of freaking you out? I mean, we've just talked about AI, but like,
I think,
is there anything that you're like, whoa, I just don't know how our community is going to deal with that, or I'm excited about that, but it also freaks me out.
Oh, I think like, ethics is one topic, I guess.
Ethics, sure.
Around like the rise of these technologies and privacy and all of these things that come up. But I think the other thing, particularly in New Zealand, is around talent in technology and in the specific areas that we're going to need. And I think like this is nothing new. I think I heard Francis Valentine talk about it maybe 5+ years ago. But I think that is something that is worrying, is like the pipeline and like of senior talent, because that's actually what's needed is, but how do we get seniors without building up juniors? And I think there's a little bit of a conundrum there, in terms of like there are a lot of graduates, but how do we get them to the level, like graduate jobs now are being, I'm going to say like, it seems like, that the junior jobs are the ones that are more easily replaceable, particularly from an engineering standpoint. But how do we get senior talent? Because that's what we need. We still need people to safely, safely build environments that can safely land and run code, for example, have those platforms. And so I think this is a challenge, maybe not just for us, but I do think that with New Zealand, also like the talent shortage across a lot of disciplines, and kind of like people moving overseas, talented people moving overseas for opportunities is a challenge for us. So I think it still will continue to be that. But in terms of our own tech sector, is like, where will we find the talent, or how do we grow the talent here? How do we invest in it, or how do we think about that? Because we know we've got this, organizations now with tooling want to go faster because they can, but then what does that mean for mentorship? What does that mean for growing talent into those senior roles?
And this has come up before, where it's not a new problem, right? It's not to do with AI. It's actually to do with how we generate more skilled people locally, or import them, and then be able to put them into productive roles. And I think that there's, I was talking to another person, and they were saying, look, we take on 8 interns a year, but we might interview 300. He's like, I would love to take on 200, but we don't have the support to be able to provide that stuff. And you look at other countries where they have internship programs, or they have kind of when you've got students that are working within the organizations, but they're supported by government, or they are coming out of university, but they've got some kind of placement where there's a supplement provided to those organizations. I mean, that's an answer, and it probably would help us to secure more talent here. But equally, like I have a theory that every company is going to be a technology company in the future with the way things are going. So how do we even kind of predict what the needs are going to be, right? Because I think that seems to be changing so fast, and there seems to be a need now to actually go, well, actually, let's not worry about the technical skills. We'll figure the technical skills out. It's actually these functional skills like critical thinking, autonomy, systematic approaches. Like these are the things that we can be encouraging that are going to fit well within the advances that we see in the tech sector.
Yeah, it's going to be challenging, I think. And I think like there's actually, I was reading something about how with, I guess, using these LLMs, now people are not thinking because they're creating responses or creating papers or creating thought papers based on like not their own thought. They can't even explain the paper. And so I think it'll be an interesting balance of like how we utilize and leverage technology to its best capability, but still train and teach those skills that you were just mentioning.
Yeah. I mean, there's that clip from Sam Altman, right? I think he was at a Congress kind of hearing or whatever. And they're like, oh, what do you think about this whole thing about AI taking over the world? And he said, well, actually, I'm worried about three things. I'm worried about the lack of, I'm doing the wrong words here, but I'm worried about the lack of cerebral development with kids, because now they are just going to ChatGPT, finding the answer and cut and paste, right? There's actually there's no stress for them there. They're not actually developing the idea or the learning there. And so, we creating a generation where they don't think? And he said, yeah, I'm worried about, that's the second thing is, I'm worried about some sentience and them wanting to take over the world. That's a thing, but there's a lot of companies that are working very, very hard around the ethical piece, around the controls and the boundaries that are available. But he said, the most likely but most scary thing is that it never takes over, but actually it just insinuates itself so heavily into our lives that it's running everything, and we're aware of the fact that it's running everything, but we don't really care anymore. And it's kind of like, you see all these things coming and happening and around this space, but how do we ensure that? And I think it's through those functional skills and trying to figure out what's going to be applicable in this new world of jobs.
And I think it's to remember that those are tools, right? They're tools to use, not tools. They're not like a magic 8-ball, right? I mean, yes, it can give you that, but I think the power of it is to be able to learn quicker, right? And to use it as a tool. And I think certainly with my kids, I'm telling them to learn how to do this by using this, rather than just ask for the answer, So, I mean, and I think lots of people are doing some interesting things with like learning how to do your homework or explaining the question, being able to create those prompts. And that in itself is like learning how to use those tools, right?
Yeah, and the interesting thing is you talk about that whole junior roles piece and removing junior roles. Junior people are the most adaptable. They will learn more quickly. They don't need to unlearn a whole bunch of things. They are the future generation of leaders. It's like, we shouldn't be pulling these people out. These are the people that are going to be the future of what our commerce looks like, especially in the tech sector, But I think that those short-term thinking of quarterly returns or whatever means that, you're going to get more profit this quarter. So you're quite prepared to kick that can down the road.
Yeah.
For the lack of future
I
talent.
don't know. Maybe they'll do their own startups. I don't know. Maybe
I hope so,
maybe that's the space for them.
But that adversity, we saw that in the GFC. We saw that in the post.com. That adversity created some of the greatest companies that have ever been built. And so, I'm hopeful.
Yes.
That's where we land.
Me too.
Yeah. Well, great to meet you.
Great to meet you.
Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
This is your captain speaking.